All right then. Hello everyone. Salam, namaste, adab, and welcome to today's event. Today we have Pervez Hoodbhoy, Professor Pervez Hoodbhoy, eminent physicist, public intellectual, civil rights activist, and author and columnist from Pakistan. He is going to talk on Pakistan, origins, identity, and future. Pervez Bhai is a very interesting figure in the sense that he's a nuclear physicist, but equally adept in the political and historical arena also. He will be formally introduced by Shahryar Azhar Saab, who has been here in the United States as a former Citibank corporate and investment banker. He also hosted a Pakistani cable channel show called Forum from New York. So he will be introducing Pervez Saab. And the concluding remarks will be given by a very illustrious Professor Tariq Rahman Saab, who is a Pride of Performance and Sitare Imtiaz awardee in Pakistan, a very distinguished national professor, a senior Fulbright scholar from universities of Oxford, Heidelberg, Texas, and Austin. He has written many books. He is very well recognized scholar. So welcome you all. And now I invite Shahryar Saab for introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Razi Saab, and the Indian Diaspora, Washington, D.C., for inviting me to give a brief introduction to Dr. Pervez Hoodbhoy and his book, Pakistan, Origins, Identity, and Future. It is indeed a great privilege for me to do so. Pakistan came into being due to the very peculiar history of the subcontinent, to make amends for the sentiments of humiliation or zillat unleashed particularly for the North Indian Muslim elites after the failed mutiny of 1857 and the geopolitical imperatives of imperial Britain. These were all necessary but not sufficient conditions for the newly created country if it was to become a nation state. As Maulana Abul Kalam Azad says in his magnum opus, India Wins Freedom, religion by itself is not sufficient to keep a people united. The dilemma that faced Pakistan's rulers at the outset then was how to create a national identity, a common purpose for such a historically, linguistically, ethnically, and culturally different and diverse people. They didn't come up with a good answer. In fact, we are still struggling with one. Dr. Hoodbhoy is a rare and bold public intellectual. At great risk to himself, he has throughout his life challenged established and obscurantist centers of power. In writing this book, Professor Hoodbhoy has set himself a monumental challenge by taking on Pakistan's dominant myths, untruths, and half-truths which have been fed to the people of Pakistan. With his extensive research, reason, and argument, he patiently dismantles them one by one. But this is not just an act of destruction. In fact, in clearing the decks of historical debris and by showing us the long denied mirror in which to collectively see Pakistan's reality, he invites the Pakistanis to build anew. In my reading and rereading this book, I have understood its goal to eventually build a strong, modern, progressive, and an inclusive Pakistan. Dr. Hoodbhoy confesses at the outset that he is not a historian, sociologist, or an anthropologist which would have qualified him to write this book. But rather than wait for one or all of them to come forward in some uncertain future, he decided at this time of his life, when he is in his 70s, to get the book off his chest, to say it as he sees it and as his research confirms it. Well, then Professor Hoodbhoy surmounts or has to surmount big challenges and hurdles in telling us the story of Pakistan's origins, identity, and future. This book could not have come at a more opportune time. Pakistan's institutions of governance stand fractured and diminished, all of them lacking the capacity to manage the grave crisis of disunity and divisiveness. It is, in fact, a polycrisis of economics, politics, law, and constitution. The future appears uncertain. But as the Chinese say, within every crisis is an opportunity. Professor Hoodbhoy boldly invites us to reimagine Pakistan by our collective will and effort. For the Indian diaspora, Washington, D.C., and other viewers, I should mention that I've had the privilege to engage Professor Hoodbhoy in a chapter-by-chapter conversation on his book. 16 chapters have become 16 episodes or vlogs posted on the Pervez Hoodbhoy special YouTube channel. While my preference, of course, is that you read the book, nevertheless, there is an alternative for you if you choose to view our conversation on YouTube. I'll end by mentioning the book's outline very briefly for your edification. Part 1 looks at the identity formation from medieval India to the British Raj. Part 2 critically examines Pakistan's three founder heroes, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, Allama Iqbal, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and also looks at three of Pakistan's opponents, Maulana Azad, Maulana Maududi, and Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the frontier Gandhi. Part 3 takes a close look at the breakup of East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, and the ongoing problems in Balochistan. Part 4 boldly asks 5 big questions and clearly answers them. 1. Was partition worth the price? 2. What is the ideology of Pakistan, and does it matter? 3. Why couldn't Pakistan become an Islamic state? 4. Why is Pakistan a Praetorian or a garrison state? And 5. Identity. I am a Pakistani, but what am I? Finally, part 5, the last part, looks ahead to what? 1, the 3 macro challenges of climate change, the population bomb, and the nuclear weapons that threaten Pakistan. 2, it examines the failure of political experiments post-1971, birth of Bangladesh, from which Pakistan appears, all these experiments, to have learned nothing. And he narrates them and this is his titles that I am reading. 1, the first experiment, Bhutto's vengeance, he calls it. 2, Zia's Nizam-e-Mustafa. 3, Musharraf's enlightened moderation. And 4th and last, Imran Khan's Riyasat-e-Madina. In the 16th and last chapter, Dr. Hoodbhoy touches the third rail of Pakistan's politics by boldly suggesting replacing the two-nation theory with one-nation theory. That is, replacing exclusion and divisiveness with inclusion and unity. He argues that as one throws away the placenta after the birth to start a new mode of feeding, survival, and nurturing, we should do the same with the two-nation theory. Now it's time to hear the oracle himself, Dr. Hoodbhoy.
Thank you, Shahryar Sahab. I am humbled by your praise, and in no sense am I an oracle. Far from that. I set about writing this book because, A, there are so few historians in Pakistan who are honest. Most of them serve power, serve the state. Second, of the few historians who are honest and who are diligent in their research, none has tried to create a historical narrative that goes back far into the past and ends at the present time, much less speculate on the future. Now, and I'm really grateful to you, Shahryar Sahab, because not only did you make those 16 episodes summarizing each of the 16 chapters, but even while the book was in its draft stage, you very thoughtfully made comments, many of whom I have incorporated in the book. And Razi Sahab, thank you for giving me this opportunity. Okay, so why does one need to go back far into the past? It's because nations want to feel they're rooted in history. Now, Pakistan, formally, I shouldn't say formally, but there's a myth that Pakistan came into being not in 1947, but in 712 AD. That is when Muhammad bin Qasim landed in Sindh, and that was the time when the first Pakistani passport started to be issued. It's absurd, I know, you will laugh at it, but that is what is taught in our history books. Now, something quite mythological is also being perpetrated in India, which is that there was a Hindu identity that goes not just 1,000 years, but many thousand years back into the past, that there was a Hindu identity that prevailed at that time. And now all these matters that concern the deep past need to be looked at. Certainly, I am no expert in this, particularly in ancient Indian history, but I did try to use as many sources of reputed Indian historians, those who have studied ancient India, and that is the first chapter of the book. Now, there's some very interesting facts that come to light over there. And one sees that there is plenty of evidence that there was no Hindu identity if one goes back several hundred years, maybe 1,000 years. In fact, 1,000 years is a good time to start, because in 990 something, the traveler Al-Biruni came to India, and he came with Mahmud Ghazni. Ghazni, as you know, or Ghaznavi, he was the destroyer of the Somnath temple and the destroyer of much else as well. Now, Al-Biruni did not come to destroy, but he came to learn. And so there's a lot of gems in his travelogue. I'll mention some of them. First, he is among the first Arabs to have named, to have given a name to India. It was Al-Hind. And from that comes, of course, Hindustan. Now, Al-Hind itself comes from Al-Sindh, and some difficulty of pronunciation caused that to mutate. Now, Hindu is not a word that occurs in any Indian sacred text. It's not in the Ved, it's not in the Ramayana, it's not in the Bhagavad Gita or anywhere. Yes, one has Sanatam Dharma, but that is different. There is no Hindu identity. There was no word until the Arabs had come to this part of the world. Al-Biruni also makes some interesting observations. He doesn't Okay, now let's recall that this is 980 something. Hundreds of years before that, the Arabs had been coming to the coastal areas of India for purposes of trading, and this was long before Islam. And some of them then later on converted to Islam. Now, when Al-Biruni writes of the peoples of India, he very interestingly refers not to Muslims over there, he refers to Turks, to Afghans, to people from Central Asia, Afghanistan, but for people like me and you, he used the word Hindu. So Hindu was to denote somebody who lived in Hindustan. It was not in a religious context that he used it. The point is that there were so many disparate people living in India at that time. They had no common identity. A person was recognized from where he lived, the sort of work he did, the village, his other attributes that were not religious at all. And of course, beliefs, supernatural beliefs, were vastly different across India. In the same sense, the Muslims were by no means a coherent whole. Now, my book there is a common thread that runs through it, which is the origin of the two-nation theory. And it's very important even today to understand where that came from. The differences, as I've tried to emphasize in earlier times between Hindus and Muslims, were minor. And there was an enormous amount of syncretism. You had Muslims worshipping in Hindu shrines and dargahs and so forth. Well, then come the Mughals much later. And at that time, there was certainly the ruled and the rulers. Now, the rulers, however, the Mughal period was, at least until Aurangzeb, very accommodative. And if there had been temple destroyers amongst them, certainly there were, but there were also those who constructed temples. And the attempt was made to incorporate Hindus into the administrative machinery. This was not because of some good feeling within them. That could have been also the case, but let's remember that the number of Muslims were always much fewer as compared to that of Hindus. And so the attempt was made to be as accommodative as possible. And we know, as a matter of fact, that many of the generals in the Mughal armies were Hindus themselves, that much of the business of the trading was in the hands of Hindus. And in fact, the Hindus were, on the whole, possibly more prosperous than the Muslims. And this invited a reaction from Muslim conservatives, the ones who wanted to purify Islam, purify Muslims of Hindu influence. So Sheikh Ahmad Sirindi is the first example, Mujaddid Alif Sani, but then followed up by Shah Waliullah and his sons. And certainly these purifiers of Islam had some effect, but it was minor. Let's remember that this was a time when certainly there was violence, but there was Muslim violence, which perhaps exceeded that of Muslim Hindu violence. In particular, the Shias had always been the subject they'd also always been a persecuted minority. Until the arrival of the British, there was a coexistence, and it's the British arrival which exacerbated the differences between the communities. And here in my book, I examine the following situation. The British needed a large number of locals in order to govern over a vast subcontinent. And this, they obviously needed it because there were so few white Englishmen, and here was a subcontinent of something like, at that time, 300 million people. How were a few thousand Englishmen to rule over such a vast population? This needed the cooperation of the elite. And so it was important for them to have persons who could speak English, who were capable of arithmetic, of reading, writing, and were knowledgeable in the ways of administration. And so at this point, the British, it was the East India Company at that point, they started making it known that those who seek jobs in the British administrative services, or who want to become lawyers or doctors or technicians or engineers or whatever, the skilled jobs, that they would have to go along with the requirements of modernity. And so 1835, I think, is a very crucial time. That's when the British, when Lord Macaulay brings along his Education Act, and at that point says that those schools will be supported which teach English and science and mathematics and all that is necessary for the modern age, that we shall no longer support madrasas, maktabs, pathshalas, gurukuls, or whatever. And here, I think, is where the difference between Hindus and Muslims started to get accentuated. The response of the Hindus as a whole was generally a positive one. I say generally because the conservatives amongst them, the traditionalists, they said, why do we need all this? But the influence of reformist movements like that of the Brahmo Samaj, Raja Ram Mohan Roy and others was enough to overcome this resistance. And so, by and large, Hindus welcomed the Macaulay Act. It was very different with Muslims because of two reasons. One is that they had ruled India and felt that they didn't need to be told by conquerors what to do. And secondly, there was an inherent conservatism that said, we don't need to know all this. We already have all the knowledge that we need in the form of the Quran. And so by and large, there was a rejection. I won't say it was a total rejection, but let's consider the fact that in Bengal, something like 8,000 ulema signed a petition saying that we have no need for the British style of education. Whatever we have the book. And so therefore, since the word of God is better than the word of the English, therefore we don't need your money. And as a consequence of that, one sees that when the first university in India was made, which was the University of Calcutta in 1856, I think, at that point, in the first graduating class, there were several hundred Hindus, but there were just 2 Muslims. Now, then comes 1857, and I think that was a turning point in the history of India, and that's when Sir Syed Ahmad Khan comes along, the first reformer, and he is convinced that the reason that Muslims have nosedived and been subjugated by the British and have lost their former glories is not what is generally held to be the case. Generally, among Muslims, it was thought that because they had been impious, that they had strayed from the true path, and one finds this echoed in the poetry of Allama Iqbal. But Sir Syed Ahmad Khan said, no, if Muslims have to get out of this rut, then they have to go along with the modern world. So you must now have science, and you must learn English, and so forth. And so he comes along as the most important, and I'd say the only prominent reformer in India's Muslim history. Of course, he succeeded, but succeeded only partially. The fact is that he had to make many compromises on this. And in spite of his starting the science translation effort and founding Aligarh Muslim University, well, MAO college to begin with, there was only so far that he could go. Now, in my book over here, I look at Sir Syed Ahmad Khan in a lot more detail than is normally done in Pakistan. In fact, once one looks at him, one sees that one sees the emergence of a figure radically different from that portrayed in Pakistan school books. Here's a man who was phenomenally enlightened in some ways. I say some ways because, well, his attitude towards women, towards the poor, whether Hindu or Muslim, left much to be desired. But he was convinced that it was a thought revolution that was needed for the Muslims. And so he set about the task of reinterpreting the Quran to make it consistent with modernity, to make it consistent with science. And that was no easy thing. And what's very interesting is that he started out as a very conservative person. In fact, in this book, I discuss one instance which exhibits his extreme conservatism. He had come under the influence of Wahhabi thought. And so his very first paper that he wrote was on whether it is Islamic to eat mangoes. Now, the reason he raised that question is because whatever the Holy Prophet had not done in Wahhabi Islam is forbidden for Muslims, for ordinary Muslims, for the believer. And since the Prophet had never eaten a mango, this being Arabia, of course, therefore, to eat a mango is not good. So permit me to just say this. उनका ये कहना था कि यौम आखिरत पर वो मुसलमान जो आम इसलिए नहीं खाता कि रसूल अकरम सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने आम नहीं खाए थे, तो फरिश्ते आकर उनका पांव चूमेंगे. So he started off this way, but ended up by interpreting Islam as the Mu'tazila did hundreds of years earlier. That is in the 8th and the 9th century. And it was a way of interpreting the Quran. I won't go into the details of that, but it led him to the following set of beliefs. He said, okay, I am a believing Muslim. I know that the Quran is the literal word of God, but I also believe in science. And so science and the Quran can never be in conflict with each other. So then he says, you must reinterpret and reinterpret. And if you cannot make the two, if you cannot reconcile the two, then choose science. Astonishing. Then he says that there's so much in the Quran that needs to be understood in the light of circumstances that prevailed then, that is 1400 years ago, and miracles, of course, violate science, and so they can only be understood as allegorical, as pieces of fiction that need to be understood in the context, whatever that means. Now, these were radical theological views. They are hidden from the public here in Pakistan, which idolizes Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. But yes, the truth is that there has not been any Muslim thinker as bold as he has been. Well, to move on, he was initially far from one who advocated separating Muslims from Hindus. He got annoyed when on the issue of Hindi, and particularly when his science magazine was taken over by an editor who said that it should be in Hindi rather than Urdu. And so he had some pet peeves. Also, he felt deeply indebted to the British and refused to join the Congress. Now, the Congress had come into existence just towards the tail end of his life. And it's at that point that he turned mildly communalist. Now, that turn towards mild communalism is interpreted in Pakistan as being the first step towards the two-nation theory. So really, the first articulation of that is to be found in Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. But it was very soon taken up by Hindus, in particular by Savarkar, Veer Savarkar, who was very explicit. He said there are two nations that inhabit the Indian subcontinent, and he says the only legitimate, the only ones who deserve to be on this subcontinent are Hindus, meaning those who have been born here. All others are invaders, and they must either submit to the Hindu way of life or else they should be done away with. Now, that is an idea which did not catch on at that time. By the way, this was, Savarkar was very enamored with Adolf Hitler, who was on the rise at that time. But this idea did not catch on at that time. And we know that he was speaking, although he had founded the RSS, but the dominant voice was that of the Indian National Congress under Jawaharlal Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi. It's they who led the freedom struggle for India, and it is they, together with Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, who eventually made India into a secular democracy for the first few decades. Now, I want to go through this book very quickly. The next chapter is that on Allama Iqbal, who is celebrated as a philosopher in Pakistan, apart from his being a poet, of course. Now, there are very interesting contradictions in Iqbal's writings, in his views, which changed drastically over the period of his life. He was, so in fact, in this book, I write of Iqbal A, meaning the Iqbal meaning the Iqbal before he left in 1905 for Britain. And it's Iqbal B when he returned 3 years later. He returned as one who was now a Muslim nationalist, as one whose views of Hindu-Muslim unity gradually changed into the extreme. But the interesting thing is that so much mythology has been wrapped around Allama Iqbal, and he is so above criticism that I thought that it would be necessary to look at him in some detail. And so 40 pages of this book are dedicated to Allama Iqbal, and there's some astonishing things that have emerged. And I say I'm astonished because there's something like 2,000 PhD theses written on Iqbal, and yet they've missed basic things. And well, to mention just two of them. One is, yes, he got a degree in philosophy, but he never wanted to be a philosopher. In fact, he spits on the idea of philosophy, and he writes to his sister that he wasted his life studying philosophy in Germany. Well, he wrote a thesis. It wasn't really a philosophy thesis. It was more about the history of mysticism in ancient Iran. That's one, and I give much other proofs other than the letter to his sister, his frequent comments, which seem to be ignored by his biographers. The second thing is his attack upon science and rationality was astoundingly free of fact. He didn't know what he was talking about when he criticized Einstein and Russell and the other great scientists of his time. So this is in his book, The Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam, which tens of thousands, if not millions, have studied, and yet nobody seems to have seen the outright fallacies that are present over there. So anyway, I won't go any more into that. Then comes Jinnah. Again, Jinnah is a man wrapped in many myths. Some say he wanted an Islamic state. Some say that he wanted a secular state. Well, he certainly was secular as a person. we know from his collected works, the Jinnah papers, 30 volumes of them, and one can open them and find that, yeah, he liked his bottle of wine and ham sandwiches. That's what Stanley Wolpert says, his biographer. But that doesn't make him secular. He was certainly personally inclined towards that. But in terms of what he wanted for Pakistan is today a matter that's been disputed for 76 years and will continue to be disputed, because he never wrote a position paper. He never wrote a book. He never put down in writing what he wanted for Pakistan. It's quite astonishing that in Pakistan, they say that we have failed Jinnah. We failed to realize his dreams. But frankly, I don't know what somebody who's been long dead dreamt of. The only thing that I can know and you can know is what he has put down on paper. And on paper, he has put down nothing. Not that Pakistan will be secular, and not that it will be an Islamic state. He made statements to both effects. And so the right wing takes up one set of quotations, one set of speeches. The liberals take the other set of speeches. And so we don't really know. In fact, this was, as I point out in this book, by design. When Jinnah was asked in the 1940s what sort of a state he envisaged for Pakistan, would it be democratic? Would it be secular? Would it be Islamic? Tell us something, people asked him, of its, give us some guidelines of what it's going to be. To which Jinnah would say, don't ask that question, because it's only the enemies of Pakistan who will ask what sort of a state we're going to make over there. Let's first get Pakistan, and then we will decide what sort of arrangement we want over there. Now, it was very clever political strategy, because if he had said it is to be secular, then there was no reason for a lot of Muslims to go along with him. Well, why not follow the Indian National Congress, which was openly secular? On the other hand, if he said if it was to be Islamic, then the question would be what sort of an Islamic state? And so he parried all these questions when the Raja of Mahmudabad specifically demanded of him that he say this is an Islamic, it is going to be an Islamic state. He said no. And so today we're stuck in the rut of whether he wanted this or wanted that. Now, a lot of people point to his 11th of August 1947 speech, which was actually a brilliant speech, in which he said that, so this is 3 days before Pakistan comes into existence. And in that, he says, you can go to your temples, you can go to your mosques. This has got nothing to do with the matters of the state. And this speech was very heartening for the religious minorities, the non-Muslims in Pakistan. On the other hand, he said that only once. He did not repeat that. He did, however, say, even after 1947, even after 14th of August 1947, that Pakistan could have Sharia. What's wrong with Sharia, he asked. So my point is, in this book, that you can find anything that you want. You can find Jinnah to be this, or you can find Jinnah to be that. His dedicated opponents were Maulana Abul Ala Maududi. Maududi opposed Jinnah because he felt that Jinnah was westernized. He knew nothing about Islam, that he was trying to create, and this is very important, he was trying to create a geographically bound Islamic state, when in fact the idea of geographical boundaries is not to be found in the Quran or in the Hadith. You see, everything has to be justified through either the Quran or the Hadith for a Muslim to believe it. And actually, Maududi had a point over there, because if you look at the Quran, there's no word for state. In fact, the notion of a geographically bounded state did not come into existence until hundreds of years later, 1648, the Treaty of Westphalia. And so Maududi was completely right in challenging Jinnah on this ground. He also used very heavy abuse and epithets against Jinnah. But after Pakistan came into existence, he accommodated to the idea of there being a geographically bounded state. And nevertheless, he had reservations. And so when Pakistan launched the first Kashmir War in 1947, he refused to endorse that as jihad, and so therefore was put into prison for 2 years. But a long story over there. In the book, I also deal with Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, who was convinced that a partition of India would leave the Muslims of India, those who did not migrate to Pakistan, that they would be forever disadvantaged. And of course, that has turned out to be largely correct. In my book, just going through this very rapidly, I ask 5 big questions. And the 5 big questions is, was partition worth the price? You're not allowed to dispute the creation of Pakistan. And certainly I am not stating over here that it shouldn't have happened. What I do is I look at who were the winners of Pakistan, the winners of partition, and who were the losers. And here I confine myself to Muslims. It's a balance sheet, and that balance sheet I will not try to summarize it over here, but I think that the biggest losers were the Muslims of India. The biggest gainers, the biggest winners was undoubtedly those who managed to seize power in Pakistan, seize the lands of fleeing Hindus. So since the Muslim League was mainly made up of feudal lords, of those who ruled by tyranny, they could now extend their personal wealth manyfold over. The second question I raised, the second big question is, what is the ideology of Pakistan, and Does it matter? Well, it sort of matters because if you say anything against the ideology of Pakistan, then you can be put in jail for 10 years. That's what the law says. But very interestingly, nowhere does one have an official document stating that the ideology of Pakistan is this, that, and that. Well, you might have a document saying the ideology of Pakistan is Islam, but then that says nothing, because so many big questions get unanswered. They are left unanswered that way. For example, can the head of state be a woman? Well, certainly Benazir Bhutto was a woman, but is that Islamic? Certainly, Pakistan's economy runs on interest. Of course, efforts have been made to do away with interest. I mean, there's been rhetoric to that extent. But today, interest in Pakistan works the same way as it works in India, the same way that it works in the United States and elsewhere. So, what is the ideology of Pakistan? Or are we living outside of the ideology of Pakistan? I'm just hinting at the contents over here. The third big question is, why couldn't Pakistan become an Islamic state? It isn't. And here, I will say the arguments that there was never an Islamic state in history are very strong. The Quran doesn't have a word for state. There is no Arabic word for state. Of course, there is now, but not in those days. The structure of the state is not spelled out in the Quran or in the Hadith. But most importantly, who will be the ruler of an Islamic state? Prophet Muhammad never specified who would succeed him. Succeed him, I mean, not in a spiritual sense, but in a temporal sense. Had he said that after me, it will be Ali, okay, or Abu Bakr or whatever, that would have ended the dispute that followed his death. And we would not have the Shia-Sunni divide, which has lasted for 1,500 years. But anyway, there are lots of other arguments over here. I need to go on. Why is Pakistan a Praetorian state? Today, the army rules Pakistan. Oh, yes, we've had elections recently, 8th of February. But we know that it was all, the army's been in control pretty much from the beginning, from Jinnah's death or a year after that to now. 4 martial laws, but then ruling from behind the scenes, that has now been officially codified as now a state where both of them participate, the civilians and the military, but the real power is with the military. Why was this the case? And here, I think it's pretty clear that the Muslim League was intellectually bankrupt. After Jinnah died, there was no central figure. But more than that, there was no idea of Pakistan. And so the only modern force that existed at that time was the army, trained by the British, capable, disciplined, and so it is they who have thereafter been in charge. But I'm just condensing the argument very fast. The fifth big question. I'm a Pakistani, but what am I? The belief in that is propagated officially is that we are people who have come from Arabia, from Iran, from Afghanistan. And it's something that a lot of Pakistanis, but not all by any means, have bought into. In fact, I should modify what I just said. I'll say that much of the Punjab believes in this, but certainly Gilgit-Baltistanis would outrightly reject this. They look different. They are different. Their ancestors came from God knows where. They are outwardly different in appearance. The Baloch, they do not trace their links to Arab ancestry. And the Sindhis believe that they have their own ancient culture which preceded that of the Arab invasions. And so this is a myth that has been, the identity of Pakistan has been something very conflicted. And so I look at this issue in some detail. I think I'm just going to end over here so that there's enough time left for Q&A. The last part, however, I'll very quickly summarize. Pakistan's immediate future is confronted by three major challenges. The first is that of climate change. Climate change is going to create havoc over here. It already is creating that. So last year, the country was underwater. There was a year before that, I'm sorry. Something like 80% of Sindh was just flooded. Now it's the other way this year. We've had no rains. It's going to get very tough during the summers. In Jacobabad, we have the hottest place on earth with temperatures exceeding that of 50 degrees centigrade, which means that human habitation is going to become very difficult, if not impossible, in large parts of Pakistan. Then, secondly, there's the population explosion. Now, that to me is something that is very perilous. The fact is that we have a 2.1% growth rate, which means that every 26, 27 years, the population doubles. By the time that 2047 comes along, that is when Pakistan is 100 years old, it will be 360 million people. And the third great physical peril that we must confront is that of nuclear war, which has gone out of people's minds, but which is ever present. And it could be by accident, it could be by design, it could be because tensions with India erupt to boiling point for some reason, whatever. And okay, I'm going to end over here with just one last line, that the future of a prosperous Pakistan depends upon its shedding old baggage, in particular the two-nation theory, in favor of the one-nation theory. That one nation means that all the peoples of Pakistan, whichever province they belong to, and whichever religion they belong to, should have absolutely the same rights. This is not the case even constitutionally at the present time. The non-Muslim minority of Pakistan is by law inferior to that of the Muslim majority. As such, Pakistan cannot be a democratic state unless a fundamental change is made to its constitution. Other things, there are many other things, Women must be given equality with men. 50% of our population is women. They're not 50% of the labor force. In fact, they're more like 5% of the labor force. And that's got to change, etc., etc. But I'm going to stop over here. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much. So now we are waiting for the concluding remark from Professor Tariq Rahman Saab, and after that we will pass on to question and answer session.
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me. Actually, I thought the question answers would come first, but let me start. There's no good summing up the book, because an excellent job of it was made right in the beginning. And then, of course, Dr. Hoodbhoy, as usual, is always so clear. He's clear-headed. He has made an excellent job of explaining his book. Let me tell you, he's known for his courage and he's known for his candor, and he brings a very rational and an intelligent mind to history. When he says that he's not a historian, that I think is subject to questioning. What is a historian? If one thinks a historian is a person who uses social science theory, etc., in the kind of language which Michel Foucault uses, that I think, yes, theory is useful sometimes, but theory should come out of the book, and it has come out of the facts, as it does in other subjects, in science subjects. So I think this is a very good social science book, and it is a much needed history, the kind of history which has not been written, as everything about the book has been said. The two-nation theory was it was used for political reasons, of course, and it should not be used anymore, etc. That has come out. The special points of this book are that nobody has actually looked at, let's say, the negative aspects, let's just call them that, or whatever, of Sir Sayyid, Iqbal, Jinnah, etc. People haven't had either the courage or the originality of doing so. I have, however, in my book on jihad, it is my book is called Interpretations of Jihad in South Asia. I have looked at Sir Sayyid's tafsir in detail, and but I haven't looked at everything else in detail. I've only looked at that. The major point, I think, is that there is this question of why the military is dominant, and there is such a thing as the ideology of Pakistan. And Mr. Jinnah's, whether he wanted a state for Muslims or he wanted an Islamic state. I have actually analyzed myself all the speeches of Mr. Jinnah, and I found that he was obviously a politician. He was speaking to the audience. So I've looked at the number of Islamic references from the moment he started making speeches till the end, and they increase or decrease. And he gives, as Dr. Hoodbhoy said, both kinds of statements. But one thing is obvious. Everywhere that he mentions Islam, he also mentions rights of women, rights of and democracy, and so on and so forth, which then he qualifies. He says Islam gave us these 1400 years ago, but he actually mentions them along with any Islamic reference. So basically, he's talking about a modern democratic system. I'm convinced about it, but yes, of course, people can agree to disagree. There is another aspect of, if suppose the ideology of Pakistan is Islam, then what about the Pakistani Hindus? What about the Pakistani Christians? And which Islam? Whether it be Sunni Islam or Shia Islam or some other, or Barelvi Islam or Deobandi Islam or what? So the ideology cannot be religion. Of course, the difference is there. The difference can lead to a sanctum of sorts. But the difference can be not of religion, but of sect. It can be of language. It can be of way of life. They can, so the difference can lead to either a sanctum where you can live quietly and peacefully, or quarreling, conflict all the time. In Pakistan, unfortunately, it might have led to some kind of a sanctum for Pakistanis, at least, not for Indian Muslims. In that, Azad was completely right. Yes, as one finds now. But one other thing here I would like to not really disagree, but I would like to point this out. Dr. Hoodbhoy, when he mentioned the system of teaching and the use of language in education, especially, which he called the Lord Macaulay system, that is entirely correct. Yes, but in the end of Lord Macaulay's minute, he says that we cannot, with our resources, teach all the children through English. He therefore prescribes what he calls the vernacular schools. So actually, most children, actually a number of children just didn't go to school. Others who did go to school did not study English. There were only about, there were a very few, number 1,200 or 1,500, I've got it somewhere in one of my books, English medium schools. There were these chiefs colleges, and the university education was in English, except Osmania University. So actually, everyone was taught and given lower jobs, not higher civil service jobs, not the officer corps of the army, etc., in the vernacular. That is where the rub of the matter, that's where the Hindu-Muslim conflict intensifies in UP. Not elsewhere, but in UP. Because in UP, the British, if anything, were partial towards Muslims, not biased against them in their policies, but towards them. Why? Because they had made Hindustani, which is another word for Urdu as well as Hindi, but it was written in the Urdu script, the official language of the lower courts, the lower schools, government schools, where most children went and go even now. They also taught them, in addition to Hindustani written in the Urdu script, they also taught in schools Hindustani written in the Hindi script, right? Now, what this means is that so many people, 86% or something like, people who are Hindus in UP and in the Punjab, they are learning this Hindi, and they're coming out and not getting jobs. Because even the lower courts, even the Thana Kachari, are all operating in Urdu. Of course, higher, they are operating in English, so let's leave them. But all these people, the whole lower middle class, all of them are not getting jobs. I mean, 36% of them are not getting jobs because they are operating in Urdu. And this happens till 1949 when the Urdu changes to Hindi, right? So that was one of the major reasons for the conflict was this British policy. Okay. I think that's it. I really don't have to say anything more. This is a fascinating book. It's a book which has been written a long time back. It has been written with the kind of intelligence which I think Dr. Pervez Hoodbhoy uses for equations and physics and mathematics. That's the sort of book which I enjoyed reading it very much indeed. Yes, one other small point. One of the major mistakes which made the Pakistan armed forces dominant was the Kashmir War, the first Kashmir War. I have analyzed it thoroughly in my book, my latest book, Pakistan's Wars, an Alternative History. The point is that this book, in this war, the generals concluded, General Akbar Khan is just one of them, that the civilian leadership should not lead because they went for peace and the war ended, and they thought they were going to win Kashmir. from that day onwards, I feel that they lost all faith in civilian leadership. This is this is where it started from. And as Dr. Hoodbhoy has made clear in this book, he has even given the numbers of figures of officers serving in the civil government and so on, etc. So I'll end just with this praise for the book. Please read it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And before we go to question and answer, just an announcement for the coming Saturday, which is totally different thing. Where it's on the culture side that we always do at the end of the month. So it is Lo Phir Basant Aayi by Danish Iqbal, who is a permanent host for this episodes. So over to Dr. Rafat Hussain for moderating the question and answer session, and he will proceed as he knows best. Rafat.
Thank you, Dr. Raziuddin. And the question and answer session is open now. But before we begin, I would like to thank Professor Hoodbhoy and Mr. Azhar and Professor Tariq Rahman for excellent talk and introduction, and as well as the concluding remark respectively. So let's begin the session, and you can raise your digital hand or put your comment or the question in chat box. I will monitor that. So let's begin first with the digital hand. Dr. Fazal Rahman, please. Okay, Razi bhai, can he unmute?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Fazal bhai, go ahead.
First, let me thank.
You are going to take care of your comment in the chat box as well?
Actually, in chat box, I have already asked that question if Professor Hoodbhoy wants to answer or think about it. But my main question is actually, but first, let me thank Professor Hoodbhoy for an excellent talk, very informative, and it's always very pleasant to listen to you. Of course, it's very full of information. My question is actually that what you have written or have been writing, it's based on what has been happening in Pakistan. Just imagine that if Pakistan would have been very successful today, what would you write? How would you explain the Pakistan coming into being? Would you write it differently? And if you do, what would you write it?
So it's quite hypothetical if Pakistan had succeeded. Well, the problem is that it's very hard to imagine that Pakistan could have stayed together. What happened in 1971 was perhaps inevitable. And in fact, one of my chapters is on Bangladesh. How could one have two parts of a country separated by 1,000 miles of hostile territory, especially when there was so little cultural contiguity between the East Wing and the West Wing? And then especially, it was only religion that was used as a glue. Now, in an ideal situation, it could have worked in the sense that, if the Bengalis had been treated just the way that the West Pakistanis were treated, then it would be, Pakistan would have stayed together, perhaps. But it's hard to imagine that religion can ever be a glue that is strong enough to bind disparate peoples together. In fact, today, one sees that the Baloch, the Gilgit-Baltistanis, and to an extent the Sindhis, are finding that religion is not not a sufficient reason for them to bond with Punjab. So there is no example in history that I know of where it is just religion which has bonded together historically different peoples. In the case of Israel, it's different. Number one, Israel is very small. Number two, Israel was made by displacing the majority population over there. Number three, Israel is not a religious state. Pakistan is. The laws in Israel are not those of the Torah. And it is, you could say it is an outpost of Western civilization, but it is not a religious outpost.
Thank you
so much. I appreciate that.
Okay, the next question from the chat box is from Jamshed Uppal Saab. You have discussed roles of the three founders, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, Allama Iqbal, and Jinnah, in pushing through the Pakistan project. You have not elaborated on the political engineering by the British on the country's creation, which tipped the balance in its favor. Was Jinnah part of this political engineering?
There was certainly political engineering on part of the British, and this goes back even before Jinnah was born. If one looks at the Hindu-Muslim divide before the British, certainly there was a hairline fracture there, but then it grew into a chasm, and it grew much faster after 1870. 1870 was when the first census was carried out on the Indian subcontinent. And there, people were asked this question, are you Hindu or are you Muslim? Now, earlier, people could have felt that they're both. There was a great amount of syncretism. People were not worried about the idea, am I this or am I that? But when jobs were made conditional on this, then certainly that divide grew and grew. And then you see that in later times, the higher posts are mostly filled by Hindus. So in fact, in this book, I give the figures of employment, and they are heavily skewed towards Hindus. The higher posts, meaning those of teachers and doctors and lawyers and engineers and so forth. So the British had a hand certainly in that. There was also an active divide and rule policy. In terms of, I would not like to say, however, that Pakistan is the result of a conspiracy. There were three actors in this. There was the Hindu leadership, there was the Muslim leadership, and there was the British. Now, the British were in a hurry to leave, and they wanted to, of course, maximize their control in the years to come. However, they didn't have the power to change everything. They had the power to change some things, but not everything. So it's a complex interplay. You have a triangle with these three actors at the apices of the triangle.
Thank you. Imtiaz Saab, go ahead, please. I ask you to unmute. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Dr. Nazir Ahmad, please unmute yourself. And so there are a lot of course, as you can imagine, there are a lot of questions on this topic. Everyone is interested in. So please be brief, both of you, the speaker as well as the person who is asking the question. Dr. Nazir Ahmad. Nazir Saab, I ask you to unmute.
I'm trying. Yes, there I am.
We can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Saab. Brilliant as usual. My question is, it relates to ideology and identity. It's a broad subject, and the answer is in the question. So I will posit my question as a thesis. Namely, there never has been an accepted fiqh for being a minority for Muslims. What does it mean to be a Muslim in America, for instance, or in the United Kingdom, or any other place where Muslims are in a minority? Now, you mentioned the Mutazilites and the Ahmad Sarhindi, Shah Waliullah, and so on, but none of them really tackled the issue. To his credit, Allama Iqbal did tackle the issue in his reconstruction of Islamic thought. We follow it. He came up with the idea that the moving principle of Islam was ijtihad, which was correct. That took him in the direction of who is qualified to do ijtihad. And then he posited that only an elected Muslim legislature was qualified to do it. That led him in the direction of Pakistan. Now, isn't it true that one has to transcend the modern terminology of political structures, political power, economic issues, divisions, and so on, and go back to the fundamentals and ask oneself, what does it mean to be a human? Quran, for instance, is very clear, مَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونِ. I created not the jinns and the humans except to serve me. And it's also very clear as to the purpose of a community, كُنْتُمْ خَيْرَ أُمَّةٍ أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ, etc., etc., and the purpose of knowledge, kuntu kunzan makhfiya. I was a hidden treasure. All of those things are there. Isn't it true, Professor Saab, that the need of the hour is not so much to get bogged down in the nitty-gritty of the political turmoils of the last 100 years, but go back to the basics and ask oneself, what does it mean to be a Muslim in a world wherein we are a minority? Sir.
Well, we're not in that big a minority, that small a minority, I mean. There are something like 1.5, 1.6 billion Muslims, and that's huge. Now, the problem is that within Muslims, there has never been an agreement as to what the true Islam is, and it is unlikely that there ever will be. After all, we've seen that that the Shia and Sunni certainly don't agree, but within the Sunnis also, there has been fratricide, and that continues today. Today, terrorism stalks all of Pakistan. And who are the terrorists? They are the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. They are the Taliban who Pakistan brought into power. We thought, rather, Pakistan's establishment thought that these are really good Muslims. And that was the belief until now. And now what we see is that they are attacking the armed forces of Pakistan, who claim to be the torchbearers of Islam, the defenders of Islam and Pakistan's ideological borders. So you see, by going back to the basics, we don't do any good to ourselves. The only way that Pakistan and, in fact, the Muslim world can prosper is to let religion be a purely personal affair. The minute you bring it into matters of the state, the minute you let it infiltrate into the ideology of an army, such as Pakistan, then we are in for eternal conflict.
Thank you, Professor. I really like the concise and point the answer. Thank you. And let's move on. There are too many to go through. So there is a question from Ashok Batra Saab. Please advise about the plight of Muslims who migrated from India to Pakistan after the partition.
I presume you're referring to the Muhajirs.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, to use the word plight is perhaps not quite correct. It certainly was the case that initially they had a very tough time, of course, resettling. But then when they did resettle, they were more privileged than the local Sindhi population. And that created resentment and created a backlash. And then in consequence of a further backlash, we had the Muttahida Qawmi Mahaz, or rather the Muhajir Qawmi Mahaz, MQM, coming into existence. The MQM claimed to represent all the Muhajirs of Pakistan. It morphed into a terrorist organization. Finally, it self-destructed and, or you could say, was crushed by the establishment, by the Punjabi establishment. And so today, the fact is that the Muhajir is not as privileged as he used to be. And certainly it is Punjab which calls the shots now, rather than Muhajirs, who initially had staffed the bureaucracy and parts of the army, but largely the bureaucracy and also the teaching profession. But now things have changed quite a bit.
Thank you. Okay, next person is Saeed Zadi Saab, and Imtiaz Saab, please try to unmute. I will come back to you.
I have unmuted myself.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Professor Hoodbhoy and other participants. My question is on behalf of the disillusioned, aggrieved Muslims of India who foolishly supported the Pakistan movement and were left holding the bag. You rightly said they were the biggest losers. My question is of social morality and justice. Do you think that the feudal lords like Zardaris and Sharifs and the fat cats of the establishment owe reparations to the Muslims of India and to the Sikhs and Hindus who were driven out of Pakistan at the time of partition? This is a matter of justice. What would you say, please?
I can only give you an observation that today the Indian Muslim does not matter to the Pakistani Muslim. The Pakistani Muslim is so embroiled in his own problems. So what we are seeing is the political turmoil now, the economic breakdown, the rise of TTP terrorism, that he doesn't have even time to think about what is going on with Muslims across the border. That connection used to exist much more strongly in the earlier days, in the earlier decades of Pakistan, but that has been substantially weakened because there is so little contact between the Muslims on this side and the Muslims on that side. As far as reparations go, no, nobody would even think of that. Reparations certainly should be, those deserving of reparations are the ones who were harmed by the Pakistan army in East Pakistan, but that's not coming either. So I think reparations is something that's out of the question.
Thank you. So I am alternating questions in between chat box and the digital hand. So please have patience. Dr. Saeed Zadi, I have asked you to unmute. Go ahead, please. Not yet? Okay. Dr. Sayyid Amir. Razi Bhai, Why the
Yeah,
people?
yeah. There is no reason. They can unmute themselves. They can show their pictures. I mean, there is nothing
Yeah,
really.
thank you. I just
Okay.
able to
Yes.
unmute myself, but
Go ahead, Amir bhai.
I cannot start the video. So anyway, I think we can go ahead without it. First of all, I want to thank Professor Hoodbhoy, and I think you are a very brave guy because your voice in Pakistan is like they say, azan in the graveyard. I mean, there's not too much following, but I think you are a very brave guy. In situation you describe in Pakistan is not so different than the most of the Islamic world. Seem to be whatever the Malays is common across the Islamic world, starting from Morocco to Indonesia. There's no different. The second thing I'm very interested, somewhere you have described your relationship with Professor Iqbal Ahmed, not the poet Iqbal Ahmed, Professor Iqbal Ahmed, the famous intellectual who spent a lot of his time in United States. Now, his ideas were socialist, communist, not interested in religion at all, and that was very close to your own ideas. And what I wonder, and you have related a very interesting incident when he was close to death and you were next to him. And there was a recitation of Quran, and you asked him if he wanted it to continue, and he said, yes, go ahead. So it's kind of, but my question is why people like him and you had no impact whatsoever on the philosophy, ideology of Pakistan, because it seemed to be going just in the opposite direction. Even Imran Khan is trying to establish the Riyasat in Medina. I mean, that makes no sense. So I would appreciate your thoughts.
Oh, what can I tell you? Yes, of course we failed. But you see, I would say that people who can see through things, they are not few in number in Pakistan. There is a substantial minority who perceive that the army has eaten us hollow, that that religion has been weaponized as a means of state control, and a lot of other things that you and I would agree with. The fact is that such people, including myself, have no power, have no political power. And until that time, things will pretty much continue as they do. Finally, just one comment that Pakistan and Morocco, you mentioned Morocco, okay. Morocco is far more open than Pakistan is. You'll see a lot of foreigners over there. You'll see that religion is not weaponized in the way that it has been in Pakistan, and now is being weaponized in India as well under Narendra Modi.
Thank you. So Razi bhai.
I'm on mute now, so can I ask the question?
Go ahead, please.
So my premise of the question is failure of Pakistan as a state. Of course, Pakistan history is very dark and violent. They start from Muhammad Ali Jinnah, day of death, the way he died, when he had his funeral, the dispute, and his burial. Then, of course, next is Fatima Jinnah, and then Bhutto and Ziaullah. So it's going on. So the question I have is that the failure is 3 or 4-fold. The most important one is political instability and failure. Second is economic structure and unable to build a solid structure. And it again, as you mentioned earlier, it was because of few people or few families try to run the country. And the third, the most important, is the education, which I don't think we talk about yet. So initially, the failure, social and cultural and religious failure was division. First, in religious form, initially it was just Shia Sunni. Then Sunni divided into Barelvi and Deobandi, and then Qadiani certainly came in picture in 70s. Then Zaban, the language, Urdu speaking and non-Urdu speaking. And then it divided further into 4 or 5 areas. And when I was growing up as a child, I heard that, of course, the establishment didn't want to do it, and then India was blamed for many years, as you know. And now in recent years, everybody else, including United States and Europe and whole world, is involved in the Pakistan politics, stability, and so on and so forth. So my question to you is, putting 75, 80-year history, coming to the conclusion, of course, we should be blamed ourselves first, then anybody else. But how much, of course, the establishment now is a little more obvious how much involved they are in between politics, religion, and everything else. So what's your thoughts about this whole process between these three major political, religious, education, and in regards of Pakistan, where we are now?
Well, it's a grand mess up. Everything, a lot of things have gone wrong. And certainly now we are heading towards a crisis. Now that these elections have taken place and yielded very shaky future, it's going to end, we're heading towards a crisis that has not been seen before, because in a year, 2 years, or perhaps less, Pakistan is going to default. And if it defaults, then the way that this country has been running is going to have to change drastically. The sort of structure that will come after that is something that we can hope to affect, hope to change, so that it becomes a more self-reliant country, a less inequitous country. The difference between the rich and the poor is enormous. And on the optimistic side, we can hope for self-corrective forces to come into action. So I agree with you that for 76 years, we've messed up, and messed up badly in everything. But at some point, human rationality takes over. And then you try to extricate yourself from the mess that you've got into. I don't know if it'll happen in my lifetime, but it's going to happen eventually.
Thank you. So there are many more questions are lined up, and I must admire Professor Hoodbhoy for the brief answers, and I expect the same from the people who are asking the question. Please ask the direct question. Do not go into the background. Thank you so much. And next person is both Prakash Saab, and then I will come back to the Farooq Farooqi, and then Iram Sajid. Go ahead, both Prakash Saab.
प्रोफेसर हुडबॉय, बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। आपके लेक्चर से बहुत कुछ जाना समझा। मैं आपसे एक दो बातें पूछना चाहूँगा। एक तो ये जो नेशनलिज्म और डेमोक्रेसी का डिस्कोर्स है, काफ़ी हिस्टोरियंस इंडिया में भी और बाहर भी, कुछ पाकिस्तानी हिस्टोरियंस जो वेस्ट में सेटल्ड हैं, उनका ये मानना है कि ये एक वेस्टर्न डिस्कोर्स है, ये हमारे लिए मुनासिब नहीं है, हमारी सोसाइटी के लिए मुनासिब नहीं है। हमारी सोसाइटी तो कम्युनिटेरियन सोसाइटी होती है, तो इसलिए ये नेशन और नेशनलिज्म की सारी बात हम पे थोपी जाती है। और ये वजह है कि ये इट डजंट सिट वेरी इजीली विद इन आवर ओन कॉन्टेक्स्ट। पहला तो ये मेरे को आपसे पूछना था। दूसरा, एक ये कैटेगरी यूज कर रहे हैं क्रिस्टोफर जैफरलो वगैरह और हिस्टोरियंस भी, हिंदू नेशनलिज्म एंड मुस्लिम नेशनलिज्म। मेरी समझ से एक टर्म हम यूज करते थे कम्युनलिज्म, वो शायद मेरे हिसाब से बेटर थी, बट आपका ओपिनियन मैं जानना चाहूँगा। और तीसरा मेरा बहुत सिंपल क्वेश्चन है कि काफ़ी हिस्टोरियंस ये मानते हैं, वो अगेन दोनों साइड के हिस्टोरियंस ये बात करते हैं कि पार्टीशन कांग्रेस ने एक्सेप्ट किया क्योंकि कांग्रेस लीडरशिप बहुत जल्दी में थी पावर अक्वायर करने के लिए। तो आई वुड जस्ट रिक्वेस्ट योर रिस्पॉन्सेस टू दीज थ्री इश्यूज। थैंक यू।
बहुत मुख्तसर बात करूंगा। जो मुल्क बने हैं, मुल्क और कौम में फर्क है। मुल्कों के जोग्राफियाई हुदूद होते हैं, जरूरी नहीं है कि कौमों के हुदूद हों। जिस तरह से आप समझ लीजिए कि बलोच हैं, तो बलोच ईरान में भी हैं, पाकिस्तान में और अफगानिस्तान में, 3 मुल्कों में हैं। यही बात आप फलस्तीनियों के बारे में कह सकते हैं, यही बात आप कुर्दों के बारे में कह सकते हैं। वो कौमें हैं और एक तवील अरसे के बाद उनकी एक शनाख्त बनी बतौर कौम के। जहां तक रियासत का ताल्लुक है, रियासत तो एक नई चीज है। नई मेरा मतलब ये कि सिर्फ कोई 400 साल पुरानी बात है कि ट्रीटी ऑफ वेस्टफेलिया 1648 में जो हुई थी, उसके बाद फिर ऐसी रियासतें बनी यूरोप में, और फिर रियासतों का तस्वुर जो है वो दुनिया भर में फैलता चला गया। अब जहां तक हिंदू नेशनलिज्म की बात है, हिंदुस्तान में अब ये कोशिश की जा रही है कि इंडिया का असर नौ एक 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 ढांचा तैयार किया जाए, और जो हिंदुत्व का दावा है कि हम हमेशा से यहाँ थे और हम ही हैं जो इसके बासी हैं। जो बाकी हैं वो बाहर से आए थे और उन्होंने हमारी तहजीब को खराब किया, उन्होंने हमारे मंदिर तोड़े, तो अब हम उनकी मस्जिदें तोड़ेंगे। अब ये एक वबा है जो फैलती चली जा रही है भारत में, जो बहुत खतरनाक है। हाँ, हमने जो नुकसानात देखे पाकिस्तान में, इस किस्म की कौम परस्ती, इस तरह की नेशनलिज्म की के नुकसानात जो देखें, वो अब हमें हिंदुस्तान में भी दिखाई देंगे। तो मुख्तसर बात ये, क्योंकि और भी बहुत से सवाल हैं।
Thank you. Tariq Faruqi Saab, and then I come back to Iram and then Samir Dosani.
Thank you very much. Excellent discussions, as usual. I think you just answered part of my question, so I'll give you another opportunity because the subject is so wide. One, as a Pakistani, just commenting on the recent elections where the army for the first time, maybe at least looking from outside, appears to have lost some of its sheen and standing for the first time in Pakistan. Where does that lead Pakistan to? Where is it headed? I know it's a very vast subject, so briefly. Second part of the question is, once I think you were just talking about that, India got a very secular start. And India was doing very well, but in the 21st century seems to be going in reverse, actually using religion and weaponizing it, as you said, just like Pakistan did, just like our neighbors, other neighbors did. Instead of learning from them, we seem to be repeating the same mistakes. So what do you see the future of India if we continue doing like that, going this path? Thank you.
Okay. So the February 8th elections, they showed that the army is not all in all. The fact is that Imran Khan managed to, even from within prison, get something like 93 seats. These are independents who are associated with the PTI. And this is indeed an achievement. It shows that here is a man who is phenomenally popular at the present time. This has made the army very worried. But let's remember one thing, that although Imran Khan and the army seem to be at loggerheads, and they are at loggerheads, they're fighting each other, and yet in terms of how they think, in terms of their ideologies, there's not one bit of difference. Imran Khan has never challenged the army for its business interests, for the corruption within the army. He was fine with the army under General Bajwa until such time as they developed differences. And but when he is released and becomes prime minister again, he will patch up with the army in no time.
Thank you.
Okay,
So
now, okay, second part of the question. There was a second part of the question.
Oh,
Where
please
is
go ahead.
India heading? Well, I think that India will come out of its fascination with Narendra Modi, and that maybe not this election, not the one in April, but the one after that will see a certain relaxation. And if not that, then the one after that. Because there is still discourse, there is still, I think, a substantial number of people in India who are opposed to the idea of a Hindu Rashtra.
Okay, thank you. So please have patience. I have not forgotten anyone. I have noted down all the names. So please stay there. Iram Sajida Saiba. Isn't the real problem in Pakistan the seizure of power by military who is fulfilling foreign agenda in shape of participating Dallas containment policy and then fighting war in Afghanistan and so on? Have not people been denied their public rights, political, economic, or others by fulfilling these agendas?
Of course, of course.
Question. Everyone asks the same thing. Go ahead, please.
Yes, one cannot disagree with that. Of course, the army is the dominant force in Pakistan. It has the army is there in every institution. Their retired people become chief executive officers of corporations, and those corporations then many of them collapse. We see that the Army Welfare Trust, the Fauji Foundation, the Shaheen Foundation, they're running banks, they're running real estate. All that is not the job of the army. Is the army fulfilling a foreign agenda? No, I think it's fulfilling its own agenda, which is to maximize which is to fill the pockets of the generals. It has done so, and look at our former generals. They are all over the world, and they have massive investments. One of them has bought an island off the coast of Australia, and उनके मजे हैं, उन्होंने लूट लिया हमें.
Okay, thank you. Samir Dosani sir. Sorry about that.
No, thank you. This is actually Shireen using Samir's account. I'm sorry.
Okay,
thank
no
you, Dr. G. Thank you, Dr. Hoodbhoy. And thank you also to the organizers who have been consistently bringing us extremely important talks over the years. I really enjoy them. Dr. Hoodbhoy, I'll definitely get your book when someone can bring it to South Africa, as books are not easily available here. My question is, and actually I was going to ask something else, but I'm going to ask this question because of what you said in your previous answer. So, what are your views on the continuation of the colonial project as a reason for what has happened to Pakistan from the beginning to now? So let me give you an example. We find here in Africa that the reason why many of our countries have not been able to have strong democracies, they tend to degenerate into military dictatorships or one party or one man rule, is because the colonial powers that left these countries formally want to continue the exploitation. So they plot in favor and provide support to corrupt and dictatorial persons or groups. And in other parts of the world, for example, in the Arabian Peninsula, we see that the same support is extended to right-wing religious elements. In Pakistan, we see a marriage between the two elements, so the military and the religious right. It has been benefiting the colonial powers, whether in terms of resources or geographically strategic control. So I'm really interested, in your views in this, because I think there is a strong angle there.
Okay. There certainly was a very strong angle, and it wasn't because of great wealth, material resources in Pakistan. Pakistan doesn't have a huge amount of oil or gas, things that can be readily extracted. On the other hand, Pakistan has a very strategic position. And so just after the formation of Pakistan, it went over to the US camp and was a staunch soldier during the Cold War. And then when the Soviets invaded in 1979, that was a great bonanza, and the billions of dollars that were poured in to fight the Soviets, most of this went to the army and to the top people of that time. And this is this was really the interest of the United States, principally. But now that Afghanistan is in the hands of the Taliban, the United States has pretty much lost interest in Pakistan. Sure, there is some residual interest, but not very much. So I'd say things have changed quite a bit in this regard. As far as India goes, well, I think India, from the very beginning, thanks to Jawaharlal Nehru, played a game of equal distance, and the non-aligned movement was the expression of Nehru's independence and, I think, farsightedness.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hoodbhoy. Always a pleasure to hear you.
Thank you.
Rafat, unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry. Okay, next person is Naushad Saab. Now I lost the track.
Hi.
I have to go back to Naushad Saab's comment. Okay. I need to ask about the dynamic shift in the thought process of Muslims and Hindus and its impact on today's context. May I request to speak? What is it? Okay, go ahead, please. Dynamic shift in the thought process of Muslim and Hindus and its impact on today's context. Pervez Saab.
Well, okay. So we see that India is far ahead of Pakistan in space, in technology, in business as well. And wherever high learning makes a difference, we see that India is doing much better than Pakistan is, or for that matter, Bangladesh as well. And I think that this has certainly to do with attitudes towards learning. The more one is engaged in mathematics, in the hard sciences, the greater the speed with which a country will progress. Now, among Muslims, there was certainly a lot of progress and substantial achievements, but those achievements belong to the distant past, from the 9th to the 13th centuries. Since that time, what has happened is that orthodoxy has crippled the acquisition of positive knowledge, meaning principally science and the scientific method. So one sees that Muslims, although they outnumber Hindus by far, 1.8 billion Muslims as compared to, I don't know, about 1 billion or so Hindus. Nevertheless, the level of achievement is very different. And however, there are countries, Muslim countries, where this is not absolutely correct. In Iran and Turkey, one sees substantial achievements in science, and this is because of because of cultural differences. So one last thing I'll say on this, that although there is a lot of pride in India about its technological achievements, and justifiably, undoubtedly, these do not owe specifically to the Hindu religion or to any religious edicts. One sees that the Chinese are doing better than the Indians, and the Chinese have no theological beliefs which have helped them along. It's just that they have acquired modernity fast, and there have been fewer impediments over there. To my mind, the quicker Muslims adopt modernity, the faster will be their progress in science and technology.
And there is a $1 billion, $1 million question. How can we bring peace between two countries? And peace is not optional. So this can take almost 2 sessions. But please go ahead and say this question is from Bernal D'Souza.
For one thing, it's very important that Pakistan and India both realize that, and particularly Pakistan, that Kashmir is an issue that cannot be solved by means of force. There was a time when there was a kind of military balance between India and Pakistan. No longer is that the case. Today, India has conventional forces that are far stronger than Pakistan's. But there is one fact that is above all else, and that is both countries possess nuclear weapons. And so changing the line of control by force has become impossible, because that would mean nuclear war. Hence, Pakistan must now drop its rhetoric that it's going to not talk to India until such time as Kashmir is resolved. It cannot be resolved. It's now out of the question. And so Pakistan should opt for what General Musharraf planned to do way back in 2006, 2007, which means softening the line of control and letting divided families reunite, let there be trade, and so forth. I think this is the formula that could have worked then. It wasn't followed through and can be followed through in the future. So let the differences be what they are, to be resolved someday. Let people go from one side of the border to the other, let goods and trade flourish. And so that's the way to go to bring about peace between India and Pakistan.
Hello, Jia.
You are, Rafat, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Right. Okay, so there are 4 more questions, and I'm not going to take any more question after that. And please be brief. There are Raj Sahai, Misbah Saab, and Zoom user. So please be ready. Raj Sahai.
Okay, thank you, Professor Hoodbhoy. I will certainly get your book and read it. My question is, as I see it, Imran Khan, had his party not been banned, would have swept the elections. And I think the masses in Pakistan are mobilized, they know it. Army has followed its own interest, which is tie up with the United States. And the United States has basically instructed to remove Imran Khan. I don't think there's any question about it. So the situation is, as I see, appears very dangerous. Is there a danger of civil war erupting, which will be very bad for not only for Pakistan, but also for India? We are the border. I mean, I live in the United States, but I have relatives in India. I have goodwill for both countries. So the question is there danger, and how do you see this resolving? Because I think the army may gain control now, but it's not going to resolve the problem, which is political as well as economic. And economic problem is very sharp in Pakistan from what I see. Thank you.
Well, if you want my prognosis, I think that there is going to be a government, a coalition government between PML-N, that is the Nawaz PML, and the People's Party. It will last a few months, but it will fall because the economic crisis is something that no party can deal with. And as public agitation rises, at some point they will release Imran Khan. Imran Khan will become prime minister, and he will make the same mess that he did earlier, perhaps worse. And then the army will step in again. So it's going to be a cycle which works like that. Imran Khan is, to my mind, the most dangerous person for Pakistan, because he, as we saw during his 3.5 years, he changed the nature of education in Pakistan. He imposed the single national curriculum, which is so heavy on religion that today the school curriculum looks like that of madrasas. And his attempt to morally police Pakistan was, if it had been carried through, would have made Pakistan into Afghanistan. So I'm sorry, I don't share your enthusiasm for Imran Khan. I feel that he is very popular, and he is like Trump, a man who has a lot of attraction for the masses, but for all the wrong reasons.
Or Modi.
I'm not an admirer of Imran Khan, by the way. I'm just saying he's mobilized the masses, that's all. And it's the situation is very difficult because the army. Anyway, thank you for your answer.
Thank you so much. Misbah Saab, I am so sorry you have been waiting for so long. Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Professor.
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to ask you the role of the exploit. Have you even, can you brief about the role of exploitative condition of feudalism that was present in Bengal? And because of that, Bengali politicians like Fazlul Haq and Surawardi, they took the way of the League. And there were 3 prime ministers in Pakistan. This is the second question. Before 71, and they were Bengalis, but they never took the stand of the Bengali language. So this is quite problematic for me at times. And lastly, Mr. Surawardi, though he was a big Bengali advocate, but belonged to an Urdu family. And I don't know whether you know it or not.
Yes.
Done.
Yes, although we had Bengali prime ministers in the early days, but they were completely subservient to the West Pakistani interests. And in fact, you know very well that the language issue was first that Mr. Jinnah created a very difficult situation which imperiled the future of Pakistan by his going to East Pakistan 7 months after August 1947, where the first thing he does is to say that Urdu will be the national language. And that, of course, is the beginning of the Bengali struggle for separation.
Thank you, Professor. Is it okay to go ahead to 5 more minutes? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So there is a Zoom user. Raise the hand, please go ahead. Okay. So there is another question in chat box. What is the future of Pakistan? What can it do to become a stable and progressive nation? Huge question, but
well, send the army back to the barracks, control the population explosion, give women liberty, their rights, stop consuming so much and start producing more, change the education system, etc., etc. All of these things have to be done. Who will do them? I don't know, but
yeah,
it will happen in course of time.
Covered in your book. So, Razibai, you said I don't see his hand.
Jabbar Saab, Rajaullah Saab.
I think it's too late. It's we need like I said, we need a workshop, a 4-hour workshop for this.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Okay, last chance for Zoom user. Somebody by the name Zoom user. Okay. And then Rajaullah Saab, and hopefully that would be the last
That
question.
will be it. That will be it.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you so much for your patience, Professor Hoodbhoy. I know your talks always generate a lot of questions.
Okay, assalamu alaikum. In fact, to save time, I put it down. My questions are already noted down there. If you can read, Dr. Hoodbhoy can read them. Unless you want, I can read them.
I don't know where it is.
Okay, almost
I
the
don't
end.
know where it is.
I will read it. The
Go ahead.
first question is the two-nation theory, right or wrong, applied to pre-1947 joint India. Why do you think it is operated in Pakistan today? Second question is, you mentioned women are 5% of workforce in Pakistan. Apparently that ignores counting their contribution, the women's contribution as household workers and homemakers. Not less important as far as I'm concerned. Is that fair to project 95% women are not working? And the last question is, why can't Pakistan imbibe secular democratic values outlined in the Quran and Sunnah and still remain a democratic republic without calling itself an Islamic state or a secular state?
Well, is democracy allowed in Islam? I have no answer to that question. You may have an
Not
opinion.
democracy, I'm mentioning democratic values. Yeah, no, what you democracy, yeah, the Islamist kind of question about just using democracy, but I'm talking about democratic values.
Democratic means.
Yes, but are any of the major things that define a state mentioned in the Quran? I don't think so. You can say that there are Quranic values, but then who will interpret them and who will relate what existed then to what is before us today? Let's take one thing such as slavery. Slavery is not forbidden in the Quran. Slavery is forbidden today. So it's not so easy to take things from the past and transport them into the present.
Okay. Well, again, I don't want to get into the discussion. These things are not straightforward. You mentioned, Dr. Hoodbhoy. People have made cases about the stopping of the complete demolition of slavery. They made cases about it. The same thing about drinking and so on. So we can't get into those discussions here. But what I'm saying is, yes, you're right. How do you do that? That's a big question. That's a big question. But the thing is, democratically elected people, republic, they can imbibe these values without calling them Islamic conditions. What I'm getting at.
Okay.
Thank you. We got it. Okay. So the Zoom user is back, and because he raised the hand earlier, so I have to give him a chance. Zoom user, please go ahead. I ask you to. You are already.
I am Nawab Siddiqui.
Oh,
I'm the user. I'm the Zoom user. I didn't sign my name.
You have ability to change the name.
So my question is for Professor. Is this that you have written an excellent book, and actually I have not read it. Probably I will read it. I lived in the United States more than 50 years. And I left Pakistan when I was only 23 years of age. And one of the reasons I left, because I could not see that I will be successful in Pakistan. And I'm quite successful in the United States. So my question to you is there anything we living in America do for Pakistan which make them a difference?
Well, help the people who you think should be helped here. Certainly you can't be here physically, but if you help those who are doing the right thing. And if you see them making a difference, then you're helping them will make a difference.
Thank
Great
you.
answer, this is what I'm doing actually, but
good.
Very good. We could do more if we have a direction to use. That's what I was thinking of that.
Nawab
Good.
Bhai, we can connect you with Pervez one-on-one if you want to help. Thank you.
Okay.
And that concludes the question and answer session. And I would really, really like to thank Professor
Hoodbhoy, can you
for
speak
being very
Gujarati?
patient. And now back to Razi Bhai for final remark.
It is.
And of course,
Really,
this is a Pakistan-India issue, and he will have some questions.
No. It has been really long session and over 10, 15 minutes. He must be very tired. But I'm just asking a totally non-political, or maybe it is, as a scientist, as an educator, you are far more aware probably than any other politician or any other social worker. How do you see the higher level, at the higher level education in the institution or colleges? Do you see capable teachers or capacity to push for good syllabus and really good classes or good teachers going for science? I mean, something which is qualitative rather than a just rut type thing. Do you see any trend over the year going towards a positive side? Like, yes, there is a hope that we are going to produce quality professionals or technocrats from those campuses?
I wish I could be more positive about this, but higher education in Pakistan has deteriorated enormously from the time that I started teaching. So I first started in 1973, and as I look at the state of universities in Pakistan today, I find that there are many more of them, but with the exception of one or two, the rest should not be called universities at all. They have deteriorated to the extent that it's just a sham now. So I'm sorry, I can't give you any hope on that regard. However, what I can tell you is that there are lots of young people, highly intelligent ones, who have discovered the internet, distance learning courses, and they're taking advantage of that. They are developing skills, not because of the institutions, but because they have sufficient capacity to take advantage of what's out there on the internet.
Good. Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah. So now let's end up here, and it's quite late. I wish that there is some kind of online connection from Indian institutions, some of those good institutions, where people can go online and have the common, like, they can get the classes, I think, smart classes or something.
I don't think on the base nation to nation is not possible. Whatever it is,
I mean, institution to institution, there can be some connection.
In this current environment problem.
Current
But
environment.
anyway,
वो मोदी जी के पास आम की टोकरी भेजे, वो तो लेके गए थे नवाज शरीफ के पास। वो ड्रामा फिर से शुरू होना चाहिए।
अब वो आम पे नहीं चलने वाले हैं। अब बड़ा गेम शुरू हो गया है।
Okay, Saeed. Okay, let's end up here.
बहुत
बहुत शुक्रिया, बहुत शुक्रिया।
ओवर टाइम रुकने का शुक्रिया।
Thank you so much.
जनाब, शुक्रिया आपका रजी साहब, आपका शुक्रिया रफत साहब आपका, और बस फिर किसी वक्त मुलाकात होगी।
You were the second speaker 4 years, almost 4 years back. When we started, after Faisal Devji, I contacted you, and since then this is heard. This is the third time you appeared, and we keep on bringing you. Thank you so much.
ठीक, बहुत शुक्रिया।
चलें जनाब, बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। रजी भाई, शुक्रिया।
खुदा हाफिज, बाय बाय। आमिर भाई,
तो रजी बंद करने से पहले वो उस यूनिवर्सिटी के कनेक्शन पे पूरी दुनिया में अब तो ऑस्ट्रेलिया से यहाँ कोर्सेज करते हैं बहुत लोग, इंडिया से भी हो सकता है, तो वो हो सकता है, लेकिन उसके लिए वही के
वो आप लोग करें। आप देखिए,
स्ट्रक्चर
यहाँ
की
से
जरूरत है।
मैं आपको एक इशारा दे रहा हूँ। अलीगढ़ के डिफरेंट एसोसिएशंस, चाहे वो शिकागो की हो, चाहे कैलिफोर्निया की हो, अलीगढ़ के ये हमारी एसोसिएशंस ने अलीगढ़ में और कुछ स्कूलों में स्मार्ट क्लासेस लगवाए हैं।
हाँ बिल्कुल होती है। तो
और उनका डायरेक्ट जो है उनके लेक्चर्स हो रहे हैं। तो मेरे कहने का मतलब कि पॉलिटिकल लेवल पे जो भी उल्टा सीधा होता होगा, लेकिन कुछ मिनिमम कनेक्शंस यूनिवर्सिटी टू हैं।
कंप्यूटर एआई के कोर्सेज ऑस्ट्रेलिया से हमारे बेटे ने बात की है, तो वो यहाँ
नहीं,
बैठ
मैं
के
कह रहा हूँ खुद इंडियन इंस्टीट्यूशन से पाकिस्तानी इंस्टीट्यूशन में जो टॉप रेटेड इंस्टीट्यूशन इंडिया के, दे आर प्रोड्यूसिंग द गुड स्टूडेंट्स।
बिल्कुल।
अगर हालात बेहतर होती तो सबसे ज्यादा तो आसान और बेहतर ये होगा।
नहीं, अभी भी अगर अप्रोच करें तो इतना बुरा नहीं होगा।
हालात गवर्नमेंट के लेवल पे हमेशा ऐसे ही रहेंगे,
एजुकेशन के मामले में नहीं होना
सेक्टर में जरूरत है।
एजुकेशन के मामले नहीं होना चाहिए।
But you can have exchange of professors teaching who can come personally and give talk and
नहीं, वो आमिर भाई वो जमाना गया एक्सचेंज का। एक्सचेंज तो इंस्टेंट एक्सचेंज होता है ना, तो ऑनलाइन। अब जैसे मैं आपसे एक्सचेंज कर रहा हूँ, तो आप हर चीज हर चीज
अब भी वो जमाना नहीं है जो आप बता रहे हैं। तो बट दिस इज व्हाट वी आर थिंकिंग अबाउट आइडियलिस्टिक सिचुएशन।
नहीं, वो आइडियल तो खैर कभी भी नहीं होगा।
Can I say something? I'm from India and I'm from the university system. I mean, we would really like this kind of exchange, but it's getting increasingly difficult now. For anything that relates to South Asia, we need to get Ministry of Home Affairs clearance. I am Brunel D'Souza from Bombay. Social Sciences. So now only these kinds of interactions are still possible.
So is it possible? Is it possible to do individually?
No, like I can come online like this. I don't know how easy or difficult it is. What will be the implications? But I was very interested in listening to this talk. But university to university collaboration should best be addressed through at government level, because without government, both governments agreeing to it, it's not going to be easy at all.
Yeah, but the point or problem is that they always talk about politics and confrontation. If suppose Pakistan educator call somebody in Indian government education department and ask that, yes, we understand situation is bad between us, but is it possible that we can have some access online from your institutions? If that question cannot hurt somebody, it can only...
I mean, these attempts should always be done. In fact, when we were doing in 2000, I forget the year, but maybe 2005 or 4, when Pakistan was setting up its AIDS control program, the first doctors and nurses had come from Pakistan to India and were trained at my university. Okay, I was responsible for the training in counseling. But things have really, and I traveled to Pakistan in 2005 for a UN conference. So I have very...
You are situated where? JNU? Where?
So I am at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Bombay.
Oh, Bombay. Oh, Mumbai. Okay.
Yes.
TFR. Okay. Yes. Yeah. All right. Yes. So
I think we have not assumed that all institutions in Pakistan in bad shape. Some of them, for example, Aga Khan University is first rate. This can compete to any other.
So he did say that couple of them bear,
So it is problem is that university professors themselves don't make any effort to increase their knowledge or ability to teach. Or Professor Hoodbhoy in his several columns in Dawn has pointed that out. So if we want to have something better in Pakistan, not necessarily we have to go to India, because that is desirable, but the relationship, that is the way it is, it may not be feasible in near future. But within Pakistan, there is a possibility of improving the level of education, and if there is proper emphasis.
But आमिर भाई, अगर ऐसे ही हो तो जहां इतनी खराबी ऑलरेडी है, तो दैट मीन्स who is going to clean that mess, or how that competition will be felt. My point was that
देख रही हो ये देखना नहीं वो बंद कर दो.
somebody is talking. So I mean, उसमें जब लोगों को एहसास ही नहीं है, तो उसमें if somebody from other institution, from other country can really infuse that, look, you can do this, you are capable, but you can do this, that's how we do. Some kind of
तो आई थिंक वो रजी सही कहना है, लेकिन जैसे हमारी कॉलेज की अलमनाई है, तो हम यहाँ पे किसी कॉलेज से, जैसे मेडिकल कॉलेज से या यूनिवर्सिटी से
बिल्कुल कर सकते हैं,
करके उनसे कहें कि भाई वी गोइंग टू सपोर्ट दिस मच फाइनेंशियली, वी वांट अ स्ट्रक्चर, वी वांट कोर्सेज कि आप उनको पढ़ाएं, इम्तिहान आप दें अपना, एंड देन दे कैन कम एंड टेक व्हाटएवर program they have to do to finalize their degree or something. It can be done, but it needs a lot of effort.
It's been going on like this for some years. It hasn't done any good. I think we needed some different thought process. Pakistan में जब एहसास यहाँ जाता रहा, आपको खुद ही एहसास नहीं है कि where you are deficient, तो बड़ा मुश्किल है. The problem has to be taken care of the university level in Pakistan itself.
आपको मैं बताऊं आमिर भाई कि even in India, which is really in medical science and other things, they're doing very well, but a lot of collaboration is going on with the leading medical institution from here. They have online, whatever is going on here, they have direct connection at Bombay or Calcutta or Delhi or Madras. They have direct connections within their medical institutions or universities, and common classes are going on. ताकि जितना भी हम एडवांस है और भी ऑब्वियसली अप टू डेट होने की बात हो रही, तो इट्स अ कांस्टेंट एफर्ट टू compete and excel.
पाकिस्तान के पॉलिटिकल सिचुएशन की वजह से it's not easy to attract foreign professors now in this situation.
but diaspora, पाकिस्तानी डायस्पोरा का बहुत बड़ा फर्ज है इस वक्त. हम लोग तो अब देख रहे हैं ना, डायस्पोरा यहाँ से करता होगा कुछ, लेकिन एक करना कहते हैं जिसको सिग्निफिकेंट करना, एक होता है कि थोड़ा बहुत किसी की मदद कर देना. कोई ऐसे एफर्ट हो जो उसको मॉडर्नाइज करने में, उनके एजुकेशन में थोड़ा एक्सीलेंस पैदा करने में रियली दे कैन मेक ए डिफरेंस. एनीवे, चलिए बहुत देर हो गई.
बहुत शुक्रिया
जी. अब अगले हफ्ते आप दानिश इकबाल को सुनिएगा. थैंक यू.
That would be very nice.
या बहुत दिनों बाद आ रहे हैं जी.